On behalf of the Henry Clay Memorial Foundation, welcome to Ashland, the Henry Clay Estate. People come here to learn about one of America's greatest statesmen, Henry Clay. But there are more stories to be told. 5 generations of the Clay family inhabited this place, and more than 100 men, women, and children were enslaved here. Today, we are exploring the stories of these enslaved individuals. Your guide, Ashley Smith, will take you on a journey of resistance and strength. Here at Ashland, we believe that the past can help interpret the present and also inform the future. As you listen to the stories of these enslaved individuals, I want you to think about what freedom means to you and what you would do to keep it.
Welcome to Traces, Slavery at Ashland. Between 1807 and 1865, around 122 men, women, and children were enslaved here at Ashland. During our time together today, we will explore the lives of those men, women, and children who lived and labored here. We will tell their stories using what traces of historical evidence remain. We will walk in their footsteps, hear stories about their lives, acknowledge their pain, and celebrate their contributions to Ashland, Kentucky, and the nation. We'll be focusing on 2 themes, resistance and strength. Throughout the tour, notice the individual acts of strength and resistance expressed by the people who were enslaved. What did it mean to be an enslaved person?
Enslaved people were bought and sold as property. When a child was born to an enslaved woman, that child was born into slavery. Enslaved people did not have freedom to do what they wanted in their lives. People who were enslaved were forced to work by those who enslaved them, and they had no rights as citizens.
Enslaved men, women, and children had very little power or voice. And because most were not allowed to learn to read or write, many did not leave behind primary sources on their own lives, things like letters or diary entries.
We will be following the story of Aaron and Charlotte Dupuis and their children Charles and Mary Ann. Of all the individuals enslaved at Ashland, the lives of the Dupuis family are the most well documented. Aaron Dupuis is first mentioned in Henry Clay's account book when Aaron was just 11 years old. This account book notes that Aaron was hired out at the age of 11 to work for someone else. Because Aaron was born into slavery and forced to work at such a young age, how might Aaron's childhood have differed from that of the Clay family children?
Aaron was about 14 years old when, in 1802, he was hired out again to make nails in downtown Lexington, Kentucky. It was there he met an enslaved girl named Charlotte who was laboring in a tailor's shop. 4 years later, when Aaron and Charlotte were about 18 years old, they were married. After they were wed, Charlotte was able to convince her enslaver to sell her to Henry Clay so that she and Aaron could be together. Aaron would later serve as Henry Clay's personal attendant and coach driver. Charlotte was a cook and nursemaid for the Clay family children and grandchildren. Aaron and Charlotte's children, Charles and Mary Ann, were forced to do similar labor to their parents. We're standing in what was the service area of the estate. The Dupuis family would have lived in this area along with other enslaved people to work in the home and surrounding area. The south wing of the mansion was chosen as a service wing because of how close it was to the smokehouse, ice houses, and dairy cellar. The service wing included a kitchen and perhaps a wash or workroom.
Enslaved people would have cooked food, washed clothes, smoked meats, filled the ice houses with ice, and stored food in the dairy cellar.
Because of enslaved people's labor, the Clays enjoyed fine cuisine and a lavish lifestyle. The enslaved workers had to go home every day to cook their own simple food and clean their rough clothes after working from dawn to dusk. Nearly everything on the estate was made possible by the enslaved people who were forced to be of service to the Clay family. Those enslaved to labor in the fields lived on another part of the farm. How do you think the Dupuis family's household labor differed from those who worked in the fields and tended to the livestock? This is all that is left of the farm road, this indentation in the ground. This road ran across the farm, connecting the service area of the estate to the fields where crops like hemp were grown. Beside the farm road were a row of buildings. These were slave quarters. The Dupuis family likely shared this space with people outside of their own family, having no privacy. Although these buildings are no longer standing, accounts tell us the slave quarters near the mansion were well-maintained brick structures. However, we do not have first-hand accounts of the conditions within those walls. What kind of activities or conversations may have taken place within those walls? The farm road both connected and separated families. Families were often separated even while living and working on the same plantation. If an enslaved woman was forced to work in the house and her husband was enslaved to work in the hemp plot, they could live a great distance away, not seeing each other very often. The Smokehouse dates back to the time Aaron and Charlotte lived at Ashland. Its primary function was to preserve meat. Enslaved people like Lewis Richardson raised all the livestock at Ashland. In the cold of winter, Richardson would have to slaughter hogs for processing into ham and bacon. The meat was covered with salt to extract moisture for several weeks. The hams were then hung from the beams, and a fire was kept going for weeks to smoke the hams. The fine hams were eaten or sold by the Clay family, while less choice cuts were given to the enslaved people. In a speech given by Lewis Richardson in 1846, he describes the condition of the enslaved people at Ashland and his escape in 1845 through the Underground Railroad. On the Underground Railroad, Lewis Richardson would have likely passed north through Ohio, staying with people, risking a great deal to take him in. Richardson crossed the Detroit River to freedom in Amherstburg, Canada. We're going to hear part of a speech given by Lewis Richardson on March 13, 1846.
I expected to be pursued as a felon, as I had been before, and to be hunted as a fox from mountain to cave. I well knew if I continued much longer with Clay, that I should be killed by such floggings and abuse by his cruel overseer in my old age.
Lewis resisted his enslavement through his escape. Once free, he used his voice to illustrate the horrors of enslavement.
Lewis Richardson's speech was published in abolitionist newspapers across the United States and Canada. These newspapers raised awareness about the realities of slavery.
Henry Clay wrote that the major reason Kentucky was able to be a national leader in the hemp industry was because of a ready supply of enslaved labor. Almost everything was done by hand and was backbreaking, dirty, and often done in times of great heat or cold. The pages of one of Henry Clay's hemp journals illustrates this.
The chart shows the names of the enslaved laborers and the weight of hemp that they broke in a day. Hemp breaking was the most demanding part of harvesting hemp fiber. This was done in the winter when it was often bitterly cold.
In this next clip, we'll see an example of hemp breaking. Hemp breaking is the process of turning hemp stalk into fiber for use in textiles and rope.
The charts show us that these men often broke over 100 pounds of hemp per day. Overseers set targets each day, and some enslaved people failed to meet those targets. Sometimes, enslaved farm laborers were unable to meet their daily targets, either because of sickness or age, but also perhaps to resist their circumstances.
Enslaved people would not have been allowed into the mansion through the front door. We will enter through the service wing of the home where enslaved people would have entered to work in the kitchen, to clean, or to serve the Clays. Wealth was displayed in these public spaces of the mansion to impress famous and other wealthy guests. People enslaved to work in the house performed incredibly intimate tasks with the Clay family. They cared for their children, cooked and served their meals, cleaned their chamber pots, and bathed and dressed them. In this room, they would have set the table, fanned away flies, and filled glasses. They would have stood along the walls while their enslavers and guests dined. The women preparing food for the family were not just home cooks. They were preparing meals for the elite and famous, people like Revolutionary War hero Marquis de Lafayette, Senator Daniel Webster, and President Martin Van Buren. We have here Charlotte Dupuis' recipe for roast, said to be a favorite of Henry Clay's.
Let's listen to what Louis Richardson had to say about food at Ashland.
They have nothing but coarse bread and meat to eat, and not enough of that. They are allowanced every week. For each field hand is allowed 1 peck of coarse cornmeal and meat in proportion, and no vegetables of any kind. Such is the treatment that Henry Clay's slaves received from him.
Skilled cooks like Charlotte Dupuis prepared formal meals for the Clay family and their guests with the best tools and ingredients money could buy. Perhaps more impressive is that despite the small rations of cornmeal and pork they were given, enslaved people used their creativity and skill to prepare flavorful meals that provided sustenance, comfort, and an opportunity to gather and share. These meals would go on to form what we know today as Southern cuisine.
For those people who labored inside of the Clay family home, their task could be intimate and personal. One particularly intimate role performed by enslaved women was caring for the children of those who enslaved them. Lucretia and Henry Clay had 11 children. Enslaved women like Charlotte Dupuis provided every aspect of childcare, including breastfeeding babies. Because Charlotte and her family worked so closely with the Clay family, their lives were well documented.
Another reason the Dupuis family is so well documented is because in 1829, Charlotte Dupuis sued Henry Clay for her freedom and that of her children. At the time Charlotte brought her suit against Henry Clay, he was the Secretary of State and one of the most powerful politicians in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, Charlotte did not win her lawsuit, and as a result, Henry Clay separated her from her family for over 3 years. Charlotte and her daughter, Mary Ann, were finally manumitted, or freed, in 1840, but Charlotte could never fully enjoy her freedom, as her husband Aaron was never freed. Aaron and Charlotte's son Charles was manumitted in 1844, and by 1850 had relocated with his family to Washington, D.C.
This drawing of Charles is one of 2 known remaining images of anyone enslaved at Ashland. Charles's face has come to represent the strength of the men, women, and children enslaved here at Ashland, whose faces we may never see, but whose lives we hope to better understand and whose stories we want to tell.
I wanted to be free before I died. If I should be caught on the way to Canada and taken back, it could but be death, and I might as well die with the colic as the fever. With these considerations, I started for Canada. Such uses as this caused me to flee from under the American eagle and take shelter under the British crown. Thanks be to heaven that I have got here at last. On yonder side of Detroit River, I was recognized as property, but on this side, I am on free soil. Hail Britannia! Shame America! A Republican despotism holding 3 millions of our fellow men in slavery. Oh, what a contrast between slavery and liberty. Here I stand erect, without a chain upon my limbs, redeemed, emancipated by the generosity of Great Britain. I now feel as independent as ever Henry Clay felt when he was running for the White House. In fact, I feel better. He has been defeated 4 or 5 times and I but once. But he was running for slavery and I for liberty. I think I have beat him out of sight. Thanks be to God that I am elected to Canada, and if I don't live but one night, I am determined to die on free soil. Let my days be few or many, let me die sooner or later, my grave shall be made in free soil.